Hey everyone, it's Meredith and welcome back to our minicast on the 11 leadership lessons of Godzilla. For those of you who are just joining us, this is part 2 of this episode. We actually recorded this with Hidden History of Godzilla, but it just didn't quite fit with the flow of the episode, so we're releasing it separately as a minicast, and we really hope that you guys enjoy it. And let's get started. Now, a few years ago, when Frank and I were first starting out, when we first started our company, Me Squared and Hutchison Solutions, we were goofing off one day, talking, I can't remember, how did this even start? I think we'd had a rough day with a client, we were really frustrated, and we were just kind of mouthing off one day, and we started writing the 11 leadership lessons from Godzilla, and Frank just kind of took it and ran with it, and it's still our most popular piece on our blog, back on our at least on our corporate blog, and in fact, we've even been contacted by a couple of professors who now use this in their MBA program as part of their syllabus. Before we go, Frank is going to go through the 11 leadership lessons from Godzilla. Now, there are some awesome memes that go with this that you really don't want to miss. So please head over to our website at www.hiddenhistoryofbusiness.com, and we'll have all of them there. You can check them out, or if, you can also hit up our Facebook page for the Hidden History of Business. We'll have them all posted there in their own album. So take it away.
When I was first in the Navy, one of the films that we had to watch was 12 O'Clock High, another classic war movie. But the reason why we had to watch it, and this is actually on Navy time, was because of the leadership lessons that were taught in that movie. When I took a look at Godzilla as an adult a few years back, all of a sudden I started realizing that from Godzilla, I learned some lessons on leadership that I could apply for my clients besides ourselves.
For those of you who don't know, in our professional consulting work, we do a lot of emergency project management, a lot of crisis management, people coming to us saying, hey, I've got this giant problem, we're over budget, we're behind schedule, we've had this major catastrophe, holy crap, help us. And so a lot of what we do is putting out fires and cleaning up messes.
And we call those Godzillas.
Yeah, the big giant problems that sucker punch you out of nowhere, that's a Godzilla. Take it away.
Okay, leadership lessons from Godzilla. There's 11 of them. The first one says that in the beginning, when a problem first appears, we make up lame excuses for what's happening because the unusual doesn't appear unusual at first.
We always hear that. So if you ever watched a Godzilla movie or a monster movie, the first thing that happens is a ship disappears at sea, and they think, oh, well, that just happens.
Well, maybe it's a mine.
Right.
Yeah,
maybe
whatever.
There was a storm, or the ship just went down. Maybe there was an explosion on board. It's never something unusual.
Yeah, no one ever says, oh, a ship disappeared. Well, it's probably a 450-foot fire-breathing monster
that's been sleeping at the bottom of the sea for several hundred years.
Yes.
Until the atomic bomb went off. Sure, that's totally what happened.
No,
yeah,
obviously.
That.
No, we always try to explain things from something that we know or that we're familiar with because it helps us to deal with the unexpected.
And that happens across all industries. For example, when I have a rare pregnancy complication called HELLP syndrome. It's incredibly rare. Very few people get this. And whenever I went into the doctor and they started seeing my symptoms, even when I was in the hospital with my lungs filling with fluid, a doctor kept trying to say, well, this is so rare. It doesn't usually happen. So maybe she just has anxiety. Maybe it's some other issue. Maybe it's one of these other common issues. Because on the outside, it could be that. They always say, don't look for zebras. If you hear hooves, look for horses, not for zebras. But sometimes it's a zebra.
It can be. So you have that. Okay, the second one says that Godzilla can't be scheduled. Godzilla happens when Godzilla happens. Problems are always unscheduled. Because if you could schedule your problem, guess what? You're prepared for it, and it's not going to be a problem.
Anyone who has spent a day with a toddler who's teething understands this.
Yes. One of the things you hear about is the 100-year storm. And Weather Bureau will sometimes come out and say, oh, this storm is a 100-year storm. Well, that means that they expect that type of storm to only occur once in 100 years. With climate change, you're starting to see these things happen more often. Well, does that mean that the Weather Bureau doesn't know what they're doing? No, what it means is that based on past experience, this is what they expect. But when you deal with something that's unexpected, the past has absolutely no bearing on it. Mm-hmm. It's a unique event. And a great example, one which I actually witnessed, was the Challenger blowing up 73 seconds after launch. Why? Because they launched in cold weather and the O-rings were too stiff and their boosters leaked and they blew up the Challenger. But it had never happened before. And even though there were people saying, hey, you got to watch out for this. In fact, the engineer who first pointed out the problem died just recently, and he carried that almost to his grave. Only at the very end, when some people found out that he still was burdened with that, did they come back and say, hey, look, it wasn't your fault. You did your best. The third one is when Godzilla first appears, we're always surprised. Gee, I've never seen a 450-foot giant monster before that breathes fire. Oh, that's not too unexpected.
And that's the thing, is that when something unexpected happens, you have to be ready for people to respond differently or abnormally. People aren't going to be able to immediately everyone, at least universally, is not going to immediately be able to jump into, hey, let me fix this right now, and be totally rational and have no emotional reaction whatsoever. Some people do shut down, and they're able to keep going. Other people have to sit there terrified for a minute. And the core, though, is that when you're surprised, you don't know how to respond.
And that's true. I remember in 9/11, we mentioned that earlier. One of my bosses at the time was a retired Air Force pilot, and he could not comprehend someone deliberately flying an aircraft into a building, not with civilians. And he just couldn't imagine someone doing that. Today we do, because we've experienced it. When Godzilla wants to play, you have to play with what you've got. That's number 4. And what that means is that when a disaster strikes, you don't have time to say, oh, I better go to the supermarket and buy some toilet paper, as we are familiar with in Washington, D.C., whenever someone says the word snow. You better already have toilet paper, and you better already have eggs and milk in the refrigerator. I have this a little rhyme that I have created a long time ago. It says, when in trouble or in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout. Because that's the response a lot of people have. Because you didn't expect all this to happen.
But at the same time, you can work with what you have. Like one of the examples that you've pointed out over and over again. When Godzilla appears, having a plan to evacuate your neighborhood in case of an industrial accident, like, say, a rail car full of chlorine gas derailing, it'll still work if you have to evacuate because of a 450-foot giant green lizard. You still have some idea of what you have to do, at least. It's better than having nothing. So it's not just that you have to work with what you've got, it's that what you've got may still be good enough. Next.
All right, number 5. If at first you don't succeed, the usual response is, get bigger tanks.
Every monster movie, right? They go at them, they say, here, we've hit them with stuff. That's not working. Let's get a bigger bomb.
Yes.
Every time, right?
Mm-hmm. One of the classic lessons is that we're always doing things that have worked in the past.
We're always fighting the last war.
Actually, one thing they kind of allude to in the original Godzilla movie was that, hey, for years, for generations, centuries even, they had been sending virgins out on rafts, and that kept the monster away. Well, gee whiz, it worked for centuries. Why don't we try it again?
But also, that's the whole thing, is sometimes we do things that we think are preventing a problem when it really didn't. And we're using Godzilla as the example here. Like we said before, our experience in the past may be misinforming us about cause and effect. Correlation is not causation.
But there's also another problem with this, is that whenever something happens, leaders are required to do something.
Yes, we must do something.
Sitting back saying, hey guys, let's just sit back and let it go is not an answer. We won't accept that. Mm-hmm. So they've got to do something, and so they'll throw whatever they have at the problem.
Often without a lot of thought or preparation. It's wasteful, but hey, they're doing something, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that. Which kind of leads us to number 6.
Yes. That is that the new technology is not the answer.
It's never the answer.
You got to remember that, this Lone Ranger uses silver bullets. They work against werewolves, but the Lone Ranger is not the only one who loves them. Managers and leaders love silver bullets because, hey, it's a little bit of effort and it'll produce everything I want.
They think when we say silver bullet, we mean a magical solution that will suddenly make everything work perfectly, quickly, cheaply, with less personnel, and that's not...
Make the problem go away.
That's not what technology does. In most cases, it actually complicates things. And anyone who's worked for an office or a company where they've suddenly had to transition to a new customer management database or a new processing system, you know this. New technology doesn't make things easier. There is no magic bullet.
Lots of examples here. I love the example from Katrina.
Yes.
The Coast Guard had this wonderful management control system to be able to control rescues and everything else. It didn't work. And what the leader in charge ended up doing was using a wall and Post-it notes. It was dependent on everything working exactly the way they expected it to. And in fact, on another locale that we were at, they had decided to get rid of all their radios and go to cell phones because they were so handy, they were so useful and everything else. And it worked just great in all their tests until a little twister hit. Mm-hmm. Twisters generate a lot of electromagnetic interference, and they destroy cell towers.
Yep.
And guess what? Cell phones didn't work anymore. So those are examples. Mm-hmm. Technology is usually not the answer.
It doesn't mean you can't use it, but you can't be completely dependent on it.
Number 7 comes from one point in the movie, which I really love. The Japanese self-defense naval forces go out there, they're depth charging, and they're searching, and he's gone. Godzilla is gone. Everybody is celebrating, and then all of a sudden he pops up in Tokyo Bay. it goes back to just human nature. We love to announce that we've solved the problem. And then we can go back to doing things the way that we have been doing things, and everything's going to be just hunky-dory. But usually what we're doing is we're dealing with the symptoms, not the problem. I'm just going to pop up again. Now, number 8 is that someone has the answer. And the question always that you have is, who has it? Well, it turns out that there is a scientist who has the answer, the oxygen bomb. And he told his fiancée, and she knows, and she reveals that secret. It's never the person in charge.
The person in charge.
But that's really what it comes down to, is that someone on your team knows who has the answer. Classic example is the Challenger, is that the engineers knew that the O-rings, and they're cold, are going to be brittle, and they're not going to seal properly, but they couldn't get that information up to the people who had to make the decision to go. There's this corollary to this rule, and that is that you can always blame the person who knows because they didn't speak up loud enough or demand your attention, even though management has punished those who did just that before.
And that leads us to number 10.
Yes. Somebody or someone always pays. Most likely not the ones who caused Godzilla. We see this over and over again. Godzilla is just the most obvious one. Hey, you drop A-bombs. The people who dropped the A-bombs are not the ones who got Godzilla.
They're not the ones who had to deal with the consequences. They're not the ones who suffer. They're not the ones who had to deal with the fear and the pain, on and on.
No.
It's usually ordinary people who had no input into the original situation that end up paying with money, lost homes, careers, and even their lives.
Yes.
Like Enron is a good example.
Enron is a good example.
And that brings us to 11, the final one.
Yes. Just remember that the solution to this problem may not be the solution to the problem. And I love quoting Peter Senge in his book, The Fifth Discipline. He states that today's problems come from yesterday's solutions. And in this case here,
he goes on and he tells the story of the rug merchant, right?
Rug with a lump in it. So he gets a stick and he beats the lump and it moves. So he beats it some more until he gets it out from underneath the rug, and it turns out to be a poisonous snake. It's got another problem. He didn't solve the problem in the first place.
And suddenly he had a very angry cobra on his hands. The other great example would be New York City in 1900.
Yes.
Right?
New York City in 1900 faced a major pollution problem. They were drowning in horse
excrement.
Yes.
This is a family show.
Yes. And they had a lot of problems with that, health and environmental problems.
Well, it's because they were using horses and horse-drawn buggies, and when you have that giant of a population and the horses are going everywhere, you have these health and environmental problems. How do you dispose of 1 million pounds of crap?
And it was literally millions of pounds every day was being disposed of. The solution? Henry Ford, the automobile, and trucks. No more horse.
Excrement. Just say excrement.
Yes. Now, the problem is that 6 years later, you have another pollution problem, and that is smog.
They were so happy. Yeah, cars smelled, but you still didn't have the crap laying around everywhere. But what do we got? 60 years later, we have another environmental problem. I mean, I was just in Salt Lake in February during one of the worst smog periods they've ever had, and it was horrific being out there. I mean, my chest hurt, my eyes hurt, everything hurt. So we were solving a problem, and it created another problem.
And I remember that. For example, I grew up in Los Angeles County, and I remember days when the fog would be so bad that my lungs would burn. And you couldn't run or do anything because it just was too painful. And at the same time, I remember in London, they were having killer smog, but it came out because of the solution. And today, well, we don't have that problem anymore, but now
we're going to find another solution, and it's going to keep going. And the point with that is that Godzilla was the result of yesterday's solution. You had a nuclear weapon that ended a war and then created a stalemate, and today an ongoing nightmare, honestly. So just by solving Godzilla, we created a bigger problem of the ethical and moral and strategical conflicts of nuclear.
And technological.
Right.
I mean, what do you do with all that waste?
And what do you do with all that power?
Yes.
And that's what we all have to deal with. And that doesn't mean, I mean, we use this phrase a lot. It doesn't mean that we're horrible people. It doesn't mean the solution was a bad solution. It means that all of our decisions have unintended consequences. We cannot possibly anticipate them. What we have to accept is that when we solve a problem, we are also creating another problem. We just don't know it yet. And if we accept that, we can respond to that more effectively. That's what we see a lot of history in, is just trying to figure out what's the next problem going to be. And instead of beating ourselves up over it and second guessing, saying, all right, let's solve this one, and accept that there will be unintended consequences that we will have to address.
Or we can do what most people do most of the time, is just ignore it and wait for it to appear.
Pass that problem on to our grandkids. Yay! If you liked this episode, consider leaving us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or social media. You can find snark, updates, and behind-the-scenes peeks of production on Twitter. Our handle is @HiddenBiz. That's @HiddenBiz. You can also find us on Facebook as The Hidden History of Business. Music for this podcast is from the album Time Within Itself by Michael Waldrop and used with permission of the artist. You can find out more about it on iTunes and Amazon. If you'd like to access show notes and multimedia content and the periodic rant from your hosts, be sure to visit our website at www.hiddenhistoryofbusiness.com.